October 28, 2019. Cedar Mill, Oregon, United States. The courtroom was dead silent. Every seat was filled. Reporters clutched their notepads. Camera operators held their breath. And in the gallery, a mother sat motionless, her eyes hollow, her hands trembling in her lap. She hadn't slept in weeks. She had buried her 11-year-old son just 3 months ago. And now, finally, she was about to watch the boy who murdered him receive his sentence. But here's the thing. The killer? He wasn't nervous. He wasn't scared. He wasn't even pretending to be sorry. 13-year-old Ethan Whitmore sat at the defense table in a crisp navy suit, his blonde hair neatly combed, his posture relaxed. And on his face, a smirk. A genuine, undeniable, almost amused little smirk, like he was sitting through a boring school assembly instead of his own murder sentencing. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Patricia Wayland, looked down at him from the bench. She had seen a lot in her 30 years on the court. Killers. Predators. Monsters of every kind. But something about this boy unsettled her in a way she couldn't quite explain. Maybe it was the way he tilted his head when witnesses cried. Maybe it was the way he whispered jokes to his attorney during testimony about his victim's final moments. Or maybe it was the way he looked at her right now, like he had already won. "Mr. Whitmore," Judge Wayland said, her voice cutting through the silence. "Before I deliver your sentence, do you have anything you'd like to say to this court?" The defense attorney leaned over, whispering urgently in Ethan's ear, probably begging him to show remorse, to say something, anything, that might soften what was coming. Ethan brushed him off. He leaned forward toward the microphone. That smirk widened into a full smile. And in a voice dripping with theatrical confidence, he said, "Yeah, I'd like to thank the Academy." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Someone in the gallery sobbed. A reporter's pen clattered to the floor. And Lucas Dellinger's mother, the woman who had held her dying hope for 6 agonizing days while her son lay in a shallow grave, let out a sound that wasn't quite human. But Ethan? Ethan just leaned back in his chair, satisfied with himself. Proud, even. He had no idea what was coming. Judge Wayland didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at this child, this golden boy, this so-called genius, and began to speak. And what she said next, it erased that smirk forever. The sentence hit Ethan Whitmore like a freight train. His eyes went wide. His mouth fell open. The color drained from his face so fast it was like watching a ghost form in real time. He tried to stand, but his legs buckled beneath him. He grabbed the table, missed, and crumpled to the floor. "And no!" he screamed. "No. You can't do this. I'm just a kid. I'm just a kid." His voice cracked. Tears poured down his cheeks. The composed, arrogant, untouchable boy genius was gone, replaced by a terrified child finally realizing that his intelligence, his charm, and his wealthy parents couldn't save him. Not this time. Bailiffs rushed forward. His mother wailed from the front row. His father stood frozen, mouth open, unable to process what had just happened. And in the gallery, Lucas Dellinger's mother sat perfectly still. For the first time in months, she exhaled. Now, before we go any further, I want to ask you to do 2 quick things. First, if you're finding this story as compelling as I am, please hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Second, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I love hearing from viewers all around the world. Because trust me, you're going to want to stay for this one. How did we get here? How did a 13-year-old boy from a quiet Oregon suburb end up collapsing in a courtroom, screaming that he was just a kid after mocking a judge at his own murder trial? That's the story I'm about to tell you. This is the story of Ethan Whitmore, a boy who had everything. Wealthy parents. A genius-level IQ. The kind of face that made adults trust him instantly. Teachers called him gifted. Neighbors called him charming. His parents called him their miracle. But behind those bright blue eyes, something was very, very wrong. And an 11-year-old boy named Lucas Dellinger paid the ultimate price for it. See, this isn't just a story about a murder. It's a story about arrogance. About a kid so convinced of his own brilliance that he thought he could outsmart everyone. The police, the prosecutors, the judge, the entire justice system. He thought his age made him untouchable. He thought his IQ made him invincible. He thought he was the smartest person in every room he entered. And for a while, it looked like he might be right. Ethan didn't just kill Lucas Dellinger. He joined the search parties looking for him. He comforted Lucas's grieving mother. He gave tearful interviews to local news, begging for his friend to come home safely, all while knowing exactly where the body was buried, because he put it there. The investigation that followed would expose a monster hiding behind a choir boy's smile. The trial would captivate the nation. Millions watching as a child stood accused of a crime most adults couldn't fathom. And the sentencing? Well, you just saw what happened at the sentencing. But to truly understand that moment, to understand why Ethan Whitmore collapsed, why his arrogance shattered, why a courtroom full of people watched a teenage killer finally break, we need to go back to the beginning. Back to Cedar Mill, Oregon. Back to an autumn afternoon when the leaves were turning gold and the air carried that first crisp bite of coming winter. Back to a quiet neighborhood where everybody knew everybody, where kids played in the streets until the sun went down, and where nothing bad ever seemed to happen. Until it did. This is the story of the boy genius who thought murder was a game. And the moment he learned he wasn't as smart as he thought. If you drove through Cedar Mill, Oregon in the fall of 2019, you'd probably slow down when you passed Maple Ridge Lane. Not because anything looked wrong. Actually, the opposite. Everything looked perfect. The lawns were manicured like golf courses. The houses were big but not flashy, the kind of homes owned by doctors and lawyers and people who drove sensible luxury cars. American flags hung from porches. Kids rode bikes in the streets. Neighbors waved to each other and actually meant it. And right in the middle of this postcard-perfect street sat the Whitmore residence. 4 bedrooms. 3 bathrooms. A 2-car garage housing a Mercedes and a BMW. The yard was immaculate. Not a single leaf out of place, even in October. Rose bushes lined the walkway. A basketball hoop stood in the driveway, though it rarely got used. From the outside, this was the American dream. From the inside, it was something else entirely. Dr. Richard Whitmore was a cardiovascular surgeon at Portland General. Brilliant. Respected. The kind of man who saved lives before breakfast and expected gratitude for it. His wife, Caroline, was a defense attorney at one of Oregon's most prestigious law firms. Sharp. Polished. The kind of woman who never lost a case or an argument. Together, they had built exactly the life they wanted. And their crown jewel? Their firstborn son, Ethan. From the moment he could talk, Ethan was different. Special. His parents knew it. His teachers knew it. Everyone knew it. He was reading chapter books at age 4. Solving algebra problems at age 7. By the time he hit middle school, his IQ had been tested at 147, genius level. His bedroom walls were covered with awards. Science fairs, math competitions, chess tournaments, spelling bees. If there was a competition, Ethan entered it. And if Ethan entered it, Ethan won. His parents couldn't have been prouder. They told everyone about their brilliant son. Dinner parties. Country club gatherings. Parent-teacher conferences. Ethan was their proof that they had done everything right. That their genes, their parenting, their investment had paid off. But here's the thing about golden children. Sometimes, the shine hides something darker underneath. The warning signs were there. They were always there. Most people just didn't want to see them. When Ethan was 9, his elementary school teacher, Mrs. Patterson, noticed something strange. During a classroom exercise about empathy, one where kids were supposed to write about a time they felt sad for someone else, Ethan turned in a blank page. When she asked him why, he tilted his head and said, "I don't understand the question." She tried to explain. She gave examples. She asked if he'd ever felt sorry for someone who was hurt or scared. Ethan just stared at her with those bright blue eyes and said, "Why would I feel something that's happening to someone else?" Mrs. Patterson mentioned it to the school counselor. The counselor mentioned it to Ethan's parents. And Dr. and Mrs. Whitmore? They laughed it off. He's just analytical, Caroline said. He thinks differently than other kids. That's what makes him gifted. The subject was dropped. No follow-up. No further questions. But Mrs. Patterson never forgot the way Ethan looked at her that day. Like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. Like she was something to study rather than someone to talk to. It gave her chills. A year later, the Whitmores did take Ethan to see a child psychologist. Just once. A single session, arranged after Ethan's younger sister, Lily, complained to her grandmother that her brother looked at her scary sometimes. Dr. Miriam Cole spent 90 minutes with Ethan. She administered tests. She asked questions. She observed his behavior. Her notes, which would later surface during the trial, contained a single underlined sentence. Narcissistic tendencies significantly beyond developmental norms. Recommend ongoing evaluation and monitoring. The Whitmores never brought him back. When asked about it later, Caroline Whitmore would claim they disagreed with the assessment. Richard would say the psychologist didn't understand gifted children. But Lily, 8 years old at the time, understood something the adults refused to accept. Her brother wasn't just different. Something was wrong with him. She stopped playing in rooms where Ethan was present. She started locking her bedroom door at night. And once, at a sleepover, she whispered to her best friend, "Sometimes I think my brother practices smiling in the mirror. Like he's learning how to look normal." Her friend thought she was joking. She wasn't. And then there was the cat. The Hendersons lived 3 houses down from the Whitmores. They had a tabby named Biscuit, a friendly orange-furred cat that liked to wander the neighborhood looking for pets and treats. One Saturday morning in the spring of 2018, Biscuit was found dead behind the Hendersons' garden shed. The official explanation was that a coyote got him. It happened sometimes in neighborhoods that bordered wooded areas. Sad, but natural. But here's what nobody talked about. The night before Biscuit disappeared, a neighbor saw Ethan Whitmore walking toward the Henderson property. Alone. Just after sunset. When asked about it, Ethan said he was looking for his frisbee. There was no frisbee in the Hendersons' yard. Nothing was ever proven. No accusations were made. The Whitmores threatened legal action against anyone who suggested their son was involved, and the whole thing quietly went away. But in the weeks that followed, other neighborhood cats started staying closer to home. Almost like they sensed something. Almost like they knew. This was Ethan Whitmore at 13. Brilliant. Praised. Protected. And completely hollow inside. His teachers saw a gifted student. His parents saw a future surgeon or senator. His neighbors saw a polite young man who always said, "Please," and "Thank you." But behind that carefully constructed mask, there was nothing. No empathy. No conscience. No real connection to any other human being. Just a cold, calculating mind that had learned to mimic emotions it didn't feel. A mind that was already planning something terrible. And right next door, completely unaware of the danger he was in, lived an 11-year-old boy named Lucas Dellinger. A boy who thought Ethan Whitmore was his best friend. Lucas Dellinger was the kind of kid who made you smile without even trying. He had messy brown hair that never stayed flat no matter how much his mom combed it. A gap-toothed grin that spread across his whole face. And these big, earnest brown eyes that made him look like he was always about to ask you a question about how the world worked. Because that's exactly what he was doing. All the time. Lucas was curious about everything. Why do birds fly in a V shape? How do traffic lights know when to change? What would happen if you dug a hole straight through the earth? His mom used to joke that "why" was his first word and he never stopped saying it. He was 11 years old. He was in the 5th grade. He loved dinosaurs, superhero movies, and pepperoni pizza with extra cheese. And he was about to cross paths with a monster. Lucas and his mother, Maria, lived in a small apartment on the other side of Cedar Mill, the side that didn't have manicured lawns and luxury cars. Their building was old but clean. 2 bedrooms. Thin walls. A parking lot view. Maria Dellinger was a single mom who worked double shifts as a nurse's aide at a local assisted living facility. She left before Lucas woke up most mornings. She came home after he was supposed to be in bed most nights. The guilt ate at her constantly, missing school plays, forgetting permission slips, heating up frozen dinners because she was too tired to cook. But Lucas never complained. Not once. He understood, even at 11, that his mom was doing everything she could. So he made his own breakfast. He walked himself to the bus stop. He did his homework at the kitchen table alone and left it out for her to see when she got home. And every morning, without fail, he left a little note on the counter. "Have a good day, Mom. I love you." Sometimes with a stick figure drawing. Sometimes with a smiley face. Always with that same message. Maria kept every single one. After Lucas died, she would find them in a shoebox under her bed. 847 notes, all stacked together, spanning years. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Lucas didn't have many friends. It wasn't that kids didn't like him. He was friendly enough. Smiled at everyone. Tried his best. But he was quiet. Shy. The kind of kid who sat alone at lunch reading books about animals or drawing pictures of the dogs he wished he could adopt. He wasn't good at sports. He didn't have the cool sneakers or the latest video games. And his clothes, while always clean, were clearly second-hand. Kids can be cruel about those things. They notice. They whisper. So Lucas existed in that lonely middle ground. Not bullied, exactly, but not included either. Just kind of invisible. Until Ethan Whitmore noticed him. It started about 6 months before everything happened. Lucas was walking home from the bus stop when he dropped his backpack. The zipper was broken, had been for weeks, and everything spilled onto the sidewalk. Books. Folders. Pencils rolling into the street. He scrambled to pick everything up, face red with embarrassment. And then a shadow fell over him. Need some help. Lucas looked up. And there was Ethan Whitmore, the older kid from the nice neighborhood. The one everyone said was a genius. The one who always looked like he stepped out of a catalog. Yeah, Lucas stammered. Thanks. Ethan knelt down and helped him gather his things. He didn't make fun of the broken zipper. He didn't laugh at the second-hand notebooks. He just helped. And then he smiled. I'm Ethan. I live over on Maple Ridge. What's your name? Lucas. Cool name. You live around here? Yeah. Just over there. Lucas pointed toward his apartment building. Ethan nodded like this was the most interesting information he'd ever received. Well, Lucas, if you ever want to hang out, come by my place. I've got a PlayStation and a basketball hoop. Gets kind of boring being an only child. He wasn't an only child. He had a sister. But Lucas didn't know that. All Lucas knew was that the coolest older kid in the neighborhood had just invited him to hang out. That someone had finally seen him. And just like that, Ethan Whitmore had his hook in. Over the next few months, the friendship, if you could call it that, grew. Lucas started spending more time at the Whitmore house. After school. On weekends. Whenever his mom was working, which was almost always. Ethan's parents barely noticed. They were too busy with their careers, their dinner parties, their carefully curated lives. Another kid in the house just meant Ethan was being social. They approved. And Lucas? Lucas was in heaven. The Whitmore house was like something from a movie. Big rooms. Thick carpets. A refrigerator full of food. A huge TV with every streaming service. Lucas had never seen anything like it. But more than that, he'd never had a friend like Ethan. Ethan let him play video games. Taught him card tricks. Helped him with homework. Asked about his life, his mom, his dreams. Lucas told him everything. He told him about wanting to be a veterinarian someday. About the rescue dog he hoped to adopt when he was older. About how his dad left before he was born and he'd never met him. About how sometimes, late at night, he could hear his mom crying in her room and he didn't know how to help. He trusted Ethan completely. Why wouldn't he? Ethan was nice to him. Ethan paid attention to him. Ethan made him feel like he mattered. He had no idea that Ethan was studying him, taking notes, mentally and literally, cataloging his routines, his habits, his vulnerabilities. Looking back, the signs were there. The way Ethan would sometimes stare at Lucas without blinking, just watching, like a scientist observing a specimen. The questions that were a little too specific. What time does your mom usually get home? Does she check on you before bed? Do your neighbors pay attention to when you come and go? The way Ethan never really laughed at Lucas's jokes. He would smile, sure, but the smile never quite reached his eyes. Lucas didn't see any of it. He just saw his best friend. His only friend. The last time Maria Dellinger saw her son alive was on October 14, 2019. It was a Tuesday. Cool and crisp. Leaves falling from the trees like nature's confetti. Maria was running late for her shift. Lucas was already dressed, backpack on, eating a granola bar at the kitchen counter. "I'm going to Ethan's after school," he said. "Is that okay?" Maria hesitated. She'd never actually met Ethan. Never talked to his parents. But Lucas always came home happy after visiting that house. Smiling. Talking about video games and how cool his friend was. What harm could it do? "Be home before dark," she said, grabbing her keys. "I will." She kissed him on the forehead. Quick. Routine. The kind of kiss you give when you don't know it's the last one. "Love you, bug." "Love you too, Mom." She was already out the door. Already thinking about the shift ahead. The patients who needed her. The bills that needed paying. She didn't look back. And by the time she got home that night, Lucas was already gone. October 14, 2019 started like any other Tuesday in Cedar Mill. The sun rose pale and hazy behind a thin layer of clouds. The temperature hovered around 50 degrees, cool enough for jackets, warm enough that kids still played outside. Leaves carpeted the sidewalks in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked at nothing. It was the kind of ordinary autumn day that nobody remembers. Unless something terrible happens. Lucas Dellinger got off the school bus at 3:47 p.m. We know this because the bus driver, a woman named Patty Hollins, remembered him specifically. She would later tell investigators that Lucas always said, "Thank you," when he stepped off the bus. Every single day. Never forgot. "Such a polite kid," she said, wiping tears from her eyes. "You don't see that much anymore." Lucas walked the 4 blocks from the bus stop to his apartment building. He dropped off his backpack, changed out of his school clothes into jeans and his favorite hoodie, a faded blue one with a dinosaur on the front that he'd had for 2 years. Then he grabbed a granola bar from the kitchen, scribbled a quick note for his mom, "Gone to Ethan's. Be back before dark," and headed out the door. The walk to Maple Ridge Lane took about 12 minutes. Lucas made it in 10. He was excited. Ethan had promised to show him something cool today. A surprise. Something secret. Lucas loved surprises. Ethan Whitmore was waiting for him. He was sitting on the front porch when Lucas walked up the driveway, a basketball in his hands, bouncing it lazily against the wooden steps. "Hey," Ethan said, flashing that perfect smile. "You came. You said you had something to show me." "I do." Ethan stood up, tucking the basketball under his arm. "But it's not here. It's out back. In the woods." Lucas hesitated. Just for a second. The woods behind the Whitmore property were dense. Dark even in daylight. Lucas had never gone back there before. "What is it?" he asked. "Can't tell you. That would ruin the surprise." Ethan's smile widened. "Come on. Don't be scared. It's really cool. I promise." Lucas looked at the tree line, then back at Ethan. His best friend. His only friend. "Okay," he said. And together, they walked toward the woods. "I'm going to stop here for a moment. Because what I'm about to describe is difficult. It's painful. And I want to be very clear about something. I'm not going to give you graphic details. I'm not going to sensationalize the violence or turn a child's death into entertainment. But I am going to tell you what happened. Because Lucas deserves to have his story told. And because understanding what Ethan did, and how he did it, is essential to understanding what kind of monster he truly was. So bear with me. The woods behind the Whitmore property stretched for nearly half a mile before hitting a chain-link fence that marked the boundary of an old industrial lot. Nobody went back there. No trails. No paths. Just tangled underbrush, fallen logs, and silence. Ethan led Lucas about 200 yards in, deep enough that the houses disappeared behind the trees, deep enough that nobody would hear anything. There was a small clearing there, a patch of dirt surrounded by thick oak trees. Ethan had been visiting this spot for weeks, preparing. A hole had already been dug. Lucas didn't notice it at first. He was looking around, searching for whatever surprise Ethan had promised. So where is it? Lucas asked. Right here, Ethan said. And before Lucas could turn around, it was over. I won't describe the method. I won't describe the sounds. What I will tell you is what investigators later pieced together from physical evidence and Ethan's own journal entries. It was fast, calculated, rehearsed. Ethan had planned every detail. The location, the timing, the tools. He had thought through every variable, anticipated every problem, prepared for every contingency. This wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't two kids playing a game that went wrong. This was premeditated murder, committed by a 13-year-old boy, against an 11-year-old who trusted him completely. The most chilling detail came from Ethan's journal. In an entry dated October 14th, written just hours after he killed Lucas, Ethan described the experience in clinical, detached terms. It was easier than I thought. He didn't even fight back. Just looked at me with those big stupid eyes like he couldn't understand what was happening. Kept asking why. Like there had to be a reason. There wasn't. I just wanted to know what it felt like. He continued. Buried him in the spot I prepared. Took about 40 minutes. Harder than I expected. The ground was packed. But I got it done. Covered it with leaves and branches. Nobody will find him. And then, at the very end of the entry, I feel fine. I thought I might feel something. I don't. Maybe I'll feel something tomorrow. Probably not. He didn't. At 6:15 p.m., Ethan Whitmore walked back into his house through the back door. His mother was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. His father wasn't home yet, still at the hospital, saving lives. Where have you been? Caroline asked without looking up. Just playing in the backyard. Wash your hands. Dinner's almost ready. Ethan washed his hands. Scrubbed the dirt from under his fingernails. Changed his shirt. The original one had a small stain on it that he told his mother was grass. She didn't question it. At 6:45 p.m., the Whitmore family sat down for dinner. Pot roast. Mashed potatoes. Green beans. Ethan ate 2 helpings. He talked about school. Complained about a math teacher he didn't like. Asked his father about a surgery he'd performed that morning. Normal. Pleasant. Engaged. His parents noticed nothing unusual. His sister, Lily, sat quietly at the end of the table, pushing food around her plate. She would later tell investigators that something felt wrong that night. That Ethan seemed too happy. That he kept smiling at nothing, like he had a secret. But she didn't say anything. Nobody did. At 8:30 p.m., Maria Dellinger came home from work. Her feet ached. Her back was sore. She wanted nothing more than to kiss her son goodnight and collapse into bed. "Lucas," she called out as she unlocked the door. "I'm home, Bug." Silence. She checked his bedroom. Empty. Bed still made. She checked the kitchen. And there, on the counter, was his note. "Gone to Ethan's. Be back before dark." Maria looked at the clock. 8:34 p.m. It had been dark for over an hour. Her heart started to beat faster. She grabbed her phone and called Lucas's cell. Straight to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. She grabbed her keys and drove to Maple Ridge Lane, a street she'd never been to, in a neighborhood that felt like another world. She knocked on the Whitmores' door at 8:52 p.m. Caroline answered, still wearing her work blazer. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for my son, Lucas. He was supposed to be playing with Ethan today." Caroline frowned. "Ethan's been home since before dinner. I don't think he had anyone over." But the note said, "Let me ask him." Caroline disappeared inside. A moment later, she returned with Ethan. The boy looked at Maria with those bright blue eyes. Innocent. Confused. "Lucas," he said. "I haven't seen him today. Was he supposed to come over?" Maria felt the ground shift beneath her feet. He left a note. He said he was coming here." Ethan shook his head slowly, sympathetically. "I was at chess club until 5, and then I came straight home. Maybe he went somewhere else." Maria stared at him, at his perfect face, his concerned expression, his helpful tone, and for a split second, just a flash, something felt wrong. But she pushed it aside, because right now, her son was missing, and that was the only thing that mattered. By 10 p.m., Maria had called the police. By midnight, the search had begun, and 200 yards behind the Whitmore house, beneath a pile of leaves and branches, Lucas Dellinger lay in the cold October earth, waiting to be found. The first 24 hours after a child goes missing are the most critical. Every cop knows this. Every investigator. Every parent who has ever watched the news and prayed it would never happen to them. The first 24 hours are when trails are still warm, when witnesses still remember what they saw, when the chances of finding that child alive are highest. After that, the odds start to drop fast. Maria Dellinger didn't know any of these statistics. She didn't need to. She just knew, somewhere deep in her gut, that something was horribly wrong. And she was right. By sunrise on October 15th, Cedar Mill had transformed. Patrol cars lined the streets. Officers went door to door with photos of Lucas, that gap-toothed smile, those big brown eyes. Volunteers gathered at the elementary school parking lot, splitting into groups, fanning out across the town with flashlights and determination. The local news picked up the story by 7 a.m. Missing, Lucas Dellinger, age 11. Last seen leaving his apartment around 4 p.m. yesterday, wearing a blue dinosaur hoodie and jeans. If you have any information, please call. Maria watched the broadcast from the police station, a cold cup of coffee trembling in her hands. She hadn't slept, couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Lucas's face. "Be back before dark." Those were the last words she read from him, written in his messy, little kid handwriting. A promise he didn't keep, because he couldn't. The search parties covered miles that first day. They walked through neighborhoods, through parks, through the woods that bordered the town. They checked dumpsters and abandoned buildings and drainage ditches. Nothing. Lucas had vanished like smoke. But there was one person who wasn't content to just walk the trails and hope for the best. One person who wanted to be right in the middle of everything. Ethan Whitmore. He showed up at the volunteer staging area on the morning of October 16th, day 2, dressed in a North Face jacket and hiking boots. His mother dropped him off with a proud smile. Ethan wanted to help, Caroline told the volunteer coordinator. He's been so worried about that little boy. The coordinator thanked her, assigned Ethan to a search group, handed him a flashlight and a whistle, and Ethan got to work. He was, by all accounts, a model volunteer. He walked the trails without complaining. He called out Lucas's name until his voice was hoarse. He offered to take extra shifts when other searchers went home exhausted. But here's what nobody noticed. Every time his group got close to the Whitmore property, close to those woods behind the house, Ethan would subtly steer them in a different direction. "I already checked over there," he'd say. "Nothing. Let's try the creek." Or, That area's too dense. We'd need machetes to get through. Better to focus on the clearings. He was helpful, logical, convincing, and he was leading them away from the body. On day 3, the vigils started. Candles, posters, prayers. The community gathered outside Lucas's apartment building, holding signs that said, "Bring Lucas home," and "We love you, Lucas." Maria stood in the center of it all, barely able to stand, held up by neighbors she barely knew. A local pastor led the crowd in prayer. And right there, in the front row, was Ethan Whitmore. Head bowed, eyes closed, lips moving silently. When the prayer ended, he approached Maria. "Mrs. Dellinger?" She looked up, saw the boy from the nice neighborhood, the one Lucas talked about all the time. "Yes. I'm so sorry about Lucas." Ethan's voice cracked with emotion. His eyes glistened with tears. "He's my friend. I keep thinking about him. I just want him to come home." Maria broke down. She pulled Ethan into a hug, sobbing into his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for being his friend." Ethan hugged her back. And if anyone had been watching closely, really closely, they might have noticed something strange. His eyes, pressed against Maria's shoulder, were dry. Completely dry. Day 4 brought the news cameras. Lucas Dellinger's disappearance had gone regional, then national. A sweet-faced 11-year-old from a small Oregon town. It was the kind of story that captured America's attention. Reporters descended on Cedar Mill like vultures. Satellite trucks parked on every corner. Correspondents did live shots in front of Lucas's apartment, in front of the school, in front of anywhere that might provide good visuals. And on the evening of October 18th, one reporter decided to do a segment on the young volunteers who had joined the search. Ethan Whitmore agreed to be interviewed. He stood in front of the camera, the setting sun behind him, looking every inch the concerned citizen. "Lucas is like a little brother to me," he said, his voice steady but emotional. "We hang out all the time. Play video games. He tells me about school, about his mom, about his dreams." The reporter nodded sympathetically. "What would you say to Lucas if he's watching right now?" Ethan looked directly into the camera. His blue eyes shimmered. "Lucas, if you're out there, just come home. Everyone's looking for you. We miss you. Your mom misses you. Just come home, buddy. Please." It was a perfect performance. Heartfelt, earnest, believable. Millions of people watched that clip, shared it, commented on what a wonderful friend Ethan was. None of them knew they were watching a killer plead for his victim to return from a grave he dug himself. Day 5. Hope was fading. The search parties grew smaller. The volunteers grew tired. Even the news coverage started to slow. Other stories demanded attention. Other tragedies competed for airtime. Maria Dellinger stopped eating, stopped speaking. She sat in her apartment, clutching Lucas's pillow, staring at the wall. The police had no leads, no witnesses, no evidence. It was like Lucas had simply ceased to exist. And then came day 6, October 20th, a Sunday. The search had been scaled back significantly. Most of the volunteers had gone home. Only a handful of dedicated teams remained, covering areas that had already been searched twice before. One of those teams included a K-9 unit from Portland. Officer Denise Carver and her German Shepherd, Ranger, had driven 2 hours to join the search. Ranger was trained in human remains detection, a skill nobody wanted to need, but everyone knew might be necessary. The team started at the edge of town and worked their way inward. Hours passed. Nothing. And then, around 2:30 p.m., they reached the woods behind Maple Ridge Lane. Ranger's behavior changed immediately. His ears perked up. His tail stiffened. He pulled at the leash, straining toward the tree line with an intensity Officer Carver had seen many times before. Too many times. "He's got something," she said into her radio. The team followed Ranger into the woods. 200 yards in, through tangled underbrush and fallen branches. into a small clearing surrounded by oak trees. Ranger stopped at a patch of disturbed earth, covered with leaves and branches, but unmistakable to a trained eye. He sat down, and he began to howl. Maria Dellinger was notified at 4:47 p.m. Her son had been found. Her son was dead. She collapsed in the hallway of the police station. Paramedics had to be called. She would later say that she doesn't remember anything from the next 6 hours, just darkness and screaming and a pain so deep it felt like her soul was being torn apart. The quiet, shy boy with a gap-toothed smile was gone, buried like garbage in the dirt behind a rich family's house. And somewhere on Maple Ridge Lane, Ethan Whitmore watched the police cars arrive from his bedroom window. He didn't panic. He didn't run. He just watched. And waited. Because in his mind, this wasn't the end. This was just the next part of the game. Detective Rosa Vance had been working homicides for 22 years. She'd seen things that would give most people nightmares for the rest of their lives. Gang executions. Domestic murders. Bodies left in dumpsters, in rivers, in shallow graves just like this one. But standing at the edge of that clearing on October 20th, watching the forensic team carefully unearth the remains of Lucas Dellinger, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Dread. Not because of the crime scene itself, though it was horrific enough. Not because of the victim's age, though that made everything worse. No. It was because of where the body was found. 200 yards from the Whitmore property. Hidden, but not hidden well enough. Buried in soil that matched the dirt in the Whitmore's garden shed. And according to Lucas's own mother, the last place her son was headed on October 14th was the Whitmore house. To see Ethan. Rosa stared at the grave. Then she looked back toward Maple Ridge Lane, toward the rooftops barely visible through the trees. A child did this. She didn't want to believe it. But 22 years had taught her something important. Monsters don't always look like monsters. The investigation officially shifted from missing persons to homicide at 6 p.m. that evening. Rosa assembled her team in a conference room at the Cedar Mill Police Department. Photos of Lucas were pinned to the board. Maps of the search area. Timelines of his last known movements. And in the corner, a single photograph that made everyone uncomfortable. Ethan Whitmore's school portrait. Blonde hair. Blue eyes, beatific smile. 13 years old. I know what you're thinking, Rosa said, addressing the room. I'm thinking it too. But we follow the evidence. Period. We don't make assumptions. We don't cut corners. And we don't let the suspect's age distract us from the truth. She pointed at the photograph. Right now, Ethan Whitmore is a person of interest. That's all. We need more before we can move forward. The room was silent. Everyone understood what she wasn't saying. If they were wrong about this, if they accused a 13-year-old boy of murder and couldn't prove it, careers would end. Lawsuits would follow. The department would never recover. But if they were right... Rosa took a deep breath. Let's get to work. The evidence started coming in fast. First, the soil analysis. Samples taken from Lucas's grave matched the composition of dirt found in the Whitmore's garden shed, the same shed where a trowel had recently gone missing. The trowel was never found, but the empty hook where it once hung was photographed and logged. Second, the fiber evidence. Tiny threads recovered from Lucas's clothing were analyzed and matched to a North Face jacket. The same brand and color that Ethan Whitmore was photographed wearing during the search effort. Third, the shoe prints. Partial impressions found near the grave matched the tread pattern of Nike sneakers, size 7. Ethan's size. The same sneakers he wore to school every day. And fourth, perhaps most damning of all, the timeline. Ethan claimed he was at chess club until 5 p.m. on October 14th. But when investigators checked with the school, they discovered something interesting. Chess club had been canceled that day. The faculty advisor was sick. An email had been sent to all members that morning. Ethan wasn't at chess club. So where was he? Rosa knew they were building a case. A strong one. But she also knew it wasn't enough. Circumstantial evidence could be explained away. Fibers could transfer innocently. Shoe prints could belong to anyone. And a missing trowel wasn't proof of anything. She needed more. She needed to talk to Ethan directly. The Whitmores were not cooperative. The moment they learned their son was a person of interest, they lawyered up. Hard. Caroline Whitmore, being a defense attorney herself, knew exactly how to stonewall an investigation. She demanded all communication go through their legal team. She threatened harassment lawsuits. She called the police chief personally to complain about witch hunts and circumstantial nonsense. Richard Whitmore stood beside her, arms crossed, radiating the quiet fury of a man who had never been told no in his life. "Our son is a victim of this tragedy too," Caroline told reporters outside their home. "He lost a friend. And now, instead of finding the real killer, the police are targeting a grieving child. It's disgusting." She was good, convincing, sympathetic. But Rosa wasn't buying it. She'd seen parents protect their children before. Seen them lie, deflect, deny. It was natural, instinctive. But there was something different about the Whitmores. They weren't just protecting Ethan. They were managing him, controlling the narrative, treating this like a PR crisis instead of a murder investigation. Almost like they knew something, or suspected it. Despite the legal barriers, Rosa found a way. Oregon law allowed investigators to interview minors without parental consent under certain circumstances. Specifically, when the minor voluntarily agreed to speak with police in a public setting. On October 23rd, Rosa approached Ethan outside his school. He was alone, walking to his mother's car, backpack slung over one shoulder. "Ethan," Rosa said, stepping into his path. "I'm Detective Vance. I was hoping we could talk for a minute." Ethan stopped. He looked at her with those blue eyes, calm, curious, completely unbothered. "About Lucas?" "That's right." A normal 13-year-old would be nervous, scared, at least a little uncomfortable. Ethan smiled. "Sure," he said. "I'd be happy to help." Caroline Whitmore spotted them from across the parking lot. Rosa could see her running, heels clicking against the pavement, phone already pressed to her ear. But it was too late. Ethan had agreed to talk, and what he said next would change everything. They sat on a bench outside the school gymnasium. Rosa kept her posture relaxed, non-threatening. Just two people having a conversation. "I know this is hard," she said. "Losing a friend like that." "It is," Ethan agreed. His face was appropriately somber. Lucas was a good kid. Didn't deserve what happened to him. "You two were close?" "Pretty close, yeah. He came over to my house sometimes. We'd play video games, talk about stuff." "When was the last time you saw him?" Ethan paused, thinking, or pretending to think. "Maybe a week before he went missing. We played basketball in my driveway. He wasn't very good, but he tried hard." Rosa nodded slowly. "See, that's interesting. Because Lucas left a note for his mom saying he was going to your house on October 14th. The day he disappeared." Something flickered in Ethan's eyes. Just for a moment. A spark of something that might have been surprise. Or might have been excitement. "Really?" he said. "That's weird. He never showed up. I was at chess club until 5, then I went straight home." "Chess club was cancelled that day, Ethan." The flicker again. Brighter this time. But his voice remained steady. "Oh, right. I forgot. I went to the library instead. Studied for a test." "Anyone see you there?" "I don't know. Maybe. I wasn't really paying attention." Rosa leaned forward slightly, just enough to close the distance between them. "Here's the thing, Ethan. Lucas was found 200 yards from your backyard, buried in dirt that matches your garden shed, wearing fibers from a jacket just like the one you own." She watched his face carefully. Nothing. No fear. No guilt. Not even a flicker of concern. Just calm, patient interest. like he was watching a movie. "That's crazy," Ethan said. "You think someone's trying to frame me?" "I didn't say that. But that's what it sounds like." He tilted his head slightly. "I mean, if the evidence points to me, and I didn't do it, then someone must be setting me up." "Right." Rosa didn't answer. Because in that moment, she understood something important. This boy wasn't nervous because he didn't think he'd get caught. He was enjoying this. The attention. The questions. The game. He thought he was smarter than everyone in the room. And he wanted to prove it. Rosa stood up slowly. "Thank you for your time, Ethan. We'll be in touch." "Anytime, Detective." He smiled that perfect smile. "I hope you find whoever did this. Lucas deserves justice." Rosa walked away, but she could feel his eyes on her back. Watching. Waiting. That night, Rosa sat in her office alone. The case files spread across her desk. The evidence. The timeline. The interview notes. She'd interrogated hundreds of suspects over the years. Killers. Rapists. The worst of the worst. But she'd never encountered anything like Ethan Whitmore. He wasn't scared. He wasn't remorseful. He wasn't even trying that hard to hide. He was playing. And he thought he was winning. Rosa closed the file. Not for long, she thought. Not for long. October 25th, 2019. 5 days after Lucas Dellinger's body was found. Detective Rosa Vance sat in an interrogation room at the Cedar Mill Police Department, waiting. The room was small. Gray walls. Fluorescent lights. A metal table bolted to the floor. 2 chairs on one side, one on the other. Standard setup. Nothing special. But what was about to happen in this room would be anything but standard. The door opened. Ethan Whitmore walked in first, followed by his mother and a man in a $3,000 suit, Gerald Hoffman, one of the most expensive defense attorneys in Oregon. Rosa had expected resistance. Lawyers filing motions. Demands for delays. Instead, the Whitmores had surprised her. They'd agreed to a formal interview. Caroline Whitmore's strategy was obvious. She believed her son was untouchable, that his intelligence, his youth, and his carefully rehearsed story would hold up under any pressure. She wanted this interview to happen. She wanted the police to embarrass themselves trying to crack a 13-year-old boy. Rosa was counting on that arrogance. Ethan sat down across from her, hands folded on the table, posture perfect. He was wearing a button-down shirt and khakis, the picture of a well-raised, innocent child. His hair was neatly combed. His expression was calm. Too calm. Gerald Hoffman sat beside him, legal pad ready, pen poised. Caroline Whitmore took a seat in the corner, watching with hawk-like intensity. Rosa placed a folder on the table. Thick. Full of papers. Most of them were blank, a psychological trick, but Ethan didn't need to know that. "Thank you for coming in, Ethan," Rosa said. "I know this isn't easy." "It's fine," Ethan replied. "I want to help." "Good. That's good." Rosa opened the folder slowly. "Let's start with something simple. Tell me about your friendship with Lucas." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. Lucas was a sweet kid. Kind of shy. Didn't have a lot of friends. I felt bad for him, you know? So I started hanging out with him. Letting him come over. Teaching him things. Teaching him things? Yeah. Video games. Card tricks. How to shoot a basketball. Stuff like that. That was nice of you, I guess. I just thought he needed a friend. Rosa nodded slowly. Let the silence stretch. Ethan didn't fidget. Didn't look away. Didn't show any sign of discomfort. Most people, especially kids, rushed to fill silence. They rambled. They over-explained. They gave themselves away. Ethan just waited. Patient. Controlled. "Let's talk about October 14th, Rosa said. "Okay." "Walk me through your day." Ethan took a breath. Thoughtful. Measured. I went to school. Normal day. Got home around 3:30. My mom was at work. Dad was at the hospital. I did some homework. Played video games. Had dinner with my family around 6:30. And chess club. I told you before. It was cancelled. I went to the library instead. Which library? The school library. Anyone see you there? I don't know. I was in the back. Reading. What were you reading? A pause. Tiny. Almost imperceptible. A book about ancient Rome. I'm interested in history. Rosa wrote something in her notepad. Let the pen scratch against the paper for a few seconds longer than necessary. See, here's the thing, Ethan. I checked with the school library. They close at 3:45 on Tuesdays. You would have had 15 minutes. Tops. Another pause. Slightly longer this time. Then I must be remembering wrong. Maybe I went home first. Studied in my room. But you said you played video games after doing homework. I did both. Studied, then played games. For how long? I don't know. A couple hours. Which games? Fortnite. Some Minecraft. Rosa nodded. Made another note. We checked your gaming accounts, Ethan. Your last login on October 14th was at 7:15 p.m. That's after dinner. Silence. For the first time, something shifted in Ethan's expression. Just a flicker. A tiny crack in the mask. But he recovered quickly. I must have been playing offline. Single-player mode. Fortnite doesn't have a single-player mode. Gerald Hoffman leaned forward. Detective, is there a point to this line of questioning? Just trying to establish a timeline, counselor. My client has already explained his whereabouts. Multiple times. If you have actual evidence, present it. Otherwise, this feels like harassment. Rosa smiled thinly. I'm just getting started. She pulled a photograph from the folder. Slid it across the table. It was a picture of the North Face jacket, the same one Ethan had worn during the search. The same one whose fibers were found on Lucas's body. Recognize this? Ethan glanced at it. Shrugged. It's my jacket. We found fibers matching this jacket on Lucas's clothing. So, I hugged him before. At the vigil. Probably transferred then. The vigil was after he died, Ethan. His body had already been in the ground for days. Another pause. Longer. Then I don't know. Maybe from another time. We hung out a lot. Rosa pulled out another photograph. The shoe prints from the crime scene. These were found near the burial site. Size 7 Nike. Same model you wear to school. Lots of people wear Nikes. True. But not lots of people live 200 yards from where Lucas was buried. Caroline Whitmore shifted in her seat. Rosa could see her jaw tightening. The first crack in the mother's confidence. But Ethan remained steady. This is all circumstantial, he said. My jacket. My shoes. My proximity. None of that proves I did anything. Rosa raised an eyebrow. You know a lot about evidence for a 13-year-old. My mom's a lawyer. I pay attention. Clearly. Rosa leaned back in her chair. Changed tactics. Tell me about the day Lucas went missing. How did you feel when you heard he was gone? Sad. Scared. I wanted to help find him. You joined the search parties. Yeah. Very dedicated. Took extra shifts. Walked miles. Lucas was my friend. Interesting thing about that, Rosa said slowly. Several volunteers mentioned that you kept steering your group away from the woods behind your house. Said you told them you'd already checked there. Ethan's expression didn't change. I did check there. Didn't find anything. You didn't find anything because you knew exactly where he was. And you knew if they looked hard enough, they'd find him. Gerald Hoffman slammed his pen on the table. That's speculation, detective. Completely unfounded. Is it? Rosa pulled out one more photograph. This one she placed directly in front of Ethan. It was a picture of his journal. Open to a specific page. Dated October 14th. Ethan's eyes widened. For the first time, real emotion crossed his face. Surprise, confusion, and just a hint of fear. We found this in your room, Rosa said. Hidden under a floorboard in your closet. Quite the hiding spot. Ethan said nothing. Would you like me to read it out loud? That was obtained illegally, Gerald Hoffman said quickly. Without a proper warrant. We had a warrant, counselor. Signed by Judge Morrison this morning. Everything was by the book. Rosa looked back at Ethan. Let me refresh your memory. October 14th. And I quote, "It was easier than I thought." He didn't even fight back. Just looked at me with those big stupid eyes like he couldn't understand what was happening. The room went cold. Caroline Whitmore made a strangled sound. Her hand flew to her mouth. That's not, she stammered. There's more, Rosa continued. Buried him in the spot I prepared. Took about 40 minutes. Nobody will find him. She looked directly at Ethan. But we did find him, Ethan. And now we've found this. Silence. Long, heavy. Suffocating. Gerald Hoffman was whispering urgently in Ethan's ear. Caroline was crying. The room felt like it was shrinking, the walls closing in. And Ethan? Ethan sat perfectly still. His eyes locked on Rosa's. And then, slowly, impossibly, the corner of his mouth twitched. Not a frown. Not a look of defeat. A smile. Tiny. Almost imperceptible. But Rosa saw it. And in that moment, she understood. He wasn't scared that he'd been caught. He was impressed. Like this was all still a game to him. And she had just made an interesting move. Interview terminated at 4:47 p.m., Rosa said, reaching for the recorder. She stood up. Gathered her files. Ethan Whitmore, you are under arrest for the murder of Lucas Dellinger. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The words hung in the air as officers entered the room. Caroline Whitmore screamed. Gerald Hoffman protested. Papers flew. But Ethan just sat there. Quiet. Still smiling. The news broke at 6 p.m. Every channel. Every station. Every screen in America. Breaking. 13-year-old arrested in connection with the murder of Lucas Dellinger. The footage was everywhere within minutes. Ethan Whitmore being led out of the Cedar Mill Police Department in handcuffs. His wrists were so small they had to use a special pair, the kind designed for juveniles. His blonde hair was slightly messed up now. His button-down shirt was untucked on one side. But his face was calm. No tears. No panic. No struggling against the officers flanking him. He walked steadily, chin up, eyes forward, like he was walking into a school assembly instead of a squad car. And just before the officers guided him into the back seat, Ethan did something that would be replayed millions of times in the days to come. He looked directly into the nearest camera. And he smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not an awkward, confused smile. A real smile. Confident. Almost amused. Like he knew a secret nobody else did. Behind him, chaos erupted. Caroline Whitmore burst through the station doors, mascara streaming down her face, her carefully constructed composure shattered into 1,000 pieces. "He's a child," she screamed. "He's just a child. You can't do this." 2 officers held her back as she clawed toward the squad car. Her designer blazer was torn. One of her heels had broken. She looked nothing like the polished attorney who had threatened lawsuits just days ago. She looked like a mother watching her world collapse. Richard Whitmore followed close behind, his face red with fury. He was shouting something about lawyers, about lawsuits, about ruining careers. But his voice was drowned out by the helicopter overhead, the clicking of cameras, the shouted questions from reporters. "Dr. Whitmore, did you know your son was capable of this? Mrs. Whitmore, do you have any comment? Is it true Ethan kept a journal describing the murder?" The questions pelted them like stones. The Whitmores retreated back into the station, surrounded by their legal team, their perfect life crumbling in real time on national television. And in the back of that squad car, Ethan Whitmore sat quietly, still smiling. The news coverage was relentless. Within hours, Ethan's face was everywhere. Cable news, social media, front pages of websites around the world. The boy genius killer. Teen prodigy accused of murdering 11-year-old friend. Monster next door. Inside the mind of a child killer. The headlines were sensational, breathless, designed to shock. And America couldn't look away. Psychologists were interviewed about childhood sociopathy. Legal experts debated whether a 13-year-old could truly understand the gravity of murder. Former FBI profilers analyzed Ethan's body language, his smile, his eerie calm. Everyone had an opinion. Some said he was a monster who deserved to rot in prison forever. Others said he was a sick child who needed help, not punishment. A few conspiracy theorists even claimed he was being framed, that a kid this smart, this accomplished, couldn't possibly have done something so horrible. But most people just wanted to understand. How does a child, a kid who won spelling bees and played chess and got straight A's, become a killer? Nobody had a good answer. Maybe there wasn't one. Inside the juvenile detention center, Ethan Whitmore was processed like any other suspect. Fingerprints, photographs, personal belongings confiscated. He was given a standard-issue jumpsuit, gray, shapeless, too big for his small frame. His expensive clothes were bagged and tagged as evidence. A guard led him to a holding cell. Small. There. A metal cot with a thin mattress. A toilet with no seat. A fluorescent light that buzzed faintly overhead. "Someone will bring you dinner in an hour," the guard said. "Sit tight." Ethan looked around the cell. Took it in slowly. The concrete walls. The steel door. The complete absence of anything comfortable or familiar. This was nothing like his bedroom on Maple Ridge Lane. For the first time, a flicker of something crossed his face. Not fear. Not yet. But awareness. The game had changed. Back at the police station, Detective Rosa Vance sat at her desk, staring at Ethan's journal. The pages were filled with neat, precise handwriting. The penmanship of a straight-A student. An honor roll kid. But the words were something else entirely. Entries dated weeks before the murder described Lucas in clinical, detached terms. Subject displays high trust levels. Eager to please. Minimal supervision from parent. Ideal. Like Lucas was a specimen. An experiment. Something to be studied and used. Other entries detailed Ethan's preparations. Identified location approximately 200 yards from rear property line. Secluded. Minimal foot traffic. Soil composition appears suitable for excavation. He had planned everything. Researched everything. Approached the murder with the same methodical precision he applied to his science fair projects. And the entry from October 14th, the one Rosa had read aloud in the interview room, was somehow even worse in full context. Execution complete. Subject expired quickly. Less resistance than anticipated. Emotional response on my part. Negligible. Interesting data point. That's what Lucas Dellinger's death was to Ethan Whitmore. A data point. Rosa closed the journal. Pressed her palms against her eyes. 22 years. Hundreds of cases. She thought she'd seen everything. She was wrong. The arraignment was scheduled for October 28th, 3 days after the arrest. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Carmen Reyes, made a decision that would define the entire case. They were going to try Ethan Whitmore as an adult. It was a controversial move. Defense attorneys screamed about cruelty, about the impossibility of a child facing adult consequences. Child advocacy groups protested. Opinion pieces flooded newspapers and websites. But Carmen Reyes stood firm. At a press conference outside the courthouse, she faced the cameras with steady resolve. "This was not a childish mistake," she said. "This was not a playground accident. Lucas Dellinger's murder was premeditated, planned, and executed with a level of sophistication that defies the defendant's age." She held up a photograph of Lucas. That gap-toothed smile. Those trusting eyes. This little boy trusted his killer. He called him his best friend. And Ethan Whitmore used that trust to lure him to his death. Not out of anger. Not out of passion. But out of curiosity. Because he wanted to know what it felt like. She lowered the photograph. "The people of Oregon will not treat this as a juvenile matter. We will pursue justice for Lucas Dellinger with the full weight of the law. And we will not rest until his killer is held accountable." The crowd erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. And somewhere in a juvenile detention center, Ethan Whitmore watched the press conference on a small television mounted to the wall of the common room. His expression was unreadable. But the guards who were watching him later said something strange. He was taking notes. On a napkin. With a golf pencil. Taking notes. Like he was studying for a test. The trial date was set for January 2020. 3 months away. 3 months for the prosecution to build their case. 3 months for the defense to construct their strategy. 3 months for America to become utterly obsessed with the boy genius killer. Ethan Whitmore was about to become the most famous 13-year-old in the country. And he was about to learn a lesson that all his intelligence, all his planning, all his arrogance had never prepared him for. The world wasn't a game. And he wasn't as smart as he thought. Now, before we move forward into the trial, I want to take a quick moment. If you've made it this far into the story, I already know something about you. You're not someone who clicks away when things get intense. You're invested. You want to see justice served. You want to understand how this ends. So if you haven't already, take a second to hit that subscribe button. Click the notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. And drop a comment below. Let me know what you think of Ethan Whitmore. Do you think he understood what he was doing? Do you think a 13-year-old can truly be evil? I read every single comment. And trust me, what's coming next is something you won't want to miss. The trial of Ethan Whitmore was about to begin. And nobody was ready for what would happen in that courtroom. January 13th, 2020. The first day of the trial. It was cold that morning. Bitter cold. The kind of January chill that seeps through your coat and settles into your bones. Frost clung to the windows of the Cedar Mill County Courthouse. Breath turned to vapor the moment it left your lips. But the cold didn't stop anyone from showing up. By 6 a.m., 3 hours before the proceedings were scheduled to begin, a line had already formed outside the courthouse. Reporters. Photographers. Protesters with signs demanding justice for Lucas. A few Ethan supporters too, believe it or not. People who thought a child couldn't possibly be guilty of something so monstrous. Satellite trucks lined the streets for blocks. Helicopters circled overhead. Every major news network had sent their top correspondents. This wasn't just a trial. This was an event. The biggest criminal case Oregon had seen in decades. And at the center of it all was a 13-year-old boy who had just turned 14 2 weeks earlier. Happy birthday, Ethan. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was suffocating. Every seat in the gallery was filled. People pressed shoulder to shoulder, craning their necks for a glimpse of the defendant. The air was thick with tension, with whispered conversations, with the barely contained energy of a crowd waiting for something explosive. At the front of the room, 2 tables faced the judge's bench. On the left sat the prosecution. Assistant District Attorney Carmen Reyes, a sharp, focused woman in her mid-40s, arranged her notes with surgical precision. Beside her sat Detective Rosa Vance and a team of junior prosecutors, all of them ready for the fight of their careers. On the right sat the defense. Gerald Hoffman had been joined by 2 additional attorneys, specialists in juvenile cases, brought in specifically to humanize Ethan, to make the jury see a scared child instead of a calculated killer. And in the center of that defense table, Ethan Whitmore. He was dressed in a navy blue suit, conservative, expensive, carefully chosen to make him look younger. His hair was neatly parted. His hands were folded in front of him, and on his face was an expression of calm, polite interest, like he was watching a documentary about someone else. The judge entered at exactly 9 a.m. The Honorable Patricia Wayland, 63 years old, 30 years on the bench, silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, reading glasses perched on her nose, a face that revealed absolutely nothing. She was known for 2 things, her fairness and her complete intolerance for theatrics. Both sides knew they would have to earn every inch in her courtroom. "All rise," the bailiff called. The room stood as one. Judge Wayland took her seat, surveyed the packed gallery, and allowed herself the smallest of sighs. "Be seated," she said. "Let's begin." Jury selection had taken 2 brutal weeks. Finding 12 people who hadn't already formed an opinion about Ethan Whitmore was nearly impossible. His face had been on every screen in America for months. His journal entries had been leaked. His smile, that eerie, knowing smile, had been analyzed by every armchair psychologist with a Twitter account. But somehow, they'd managed. 7 women, 5 men, ages ranging from 24 to 67. A mix of parents, professionals, and retirees. They sat in the jury box now, trying their best to look neutral. But Rosa could see it in their faces, the way some of them glanced at Ethan with barely disguised unease, the way others seemed determined not to look at him at all. They were human. They had already seen the headlines. The question was whether they could set all that aside and focus on the evidence. Carmen Reyes was counting on the answer being yes. The prosecution's opening statement was a masterpiece. Carmen stood slowly, walked to the center of the courtroom, let the silence build for a long moment before speaking. Lucas Dellinger was 11 years old. She paused. Let that sink in. He liked dinosaurs. He wanted to be a veterinarian. He wrote his mother a note every single day telling her he loved her. He was shy. He was kind. He was trusting. Another pause. And that trust killed him. She turned toward the defense table. Toward Ethan, who met her gaze without flinching. The defendant, Ethan Whitmore, was supposed to be Lucas's friend. His protector. The older kid who took him under his wing. Lucas idolized him. Looked up to him. Would have done anything he asked. Carmen walked slowly toward the jury box. On October 14, 2019, Ethan Whitmore used that trust to lure Lucas into the woods behind his family's home. And there, in a clearing he had prepared days in advance, he murdered an 11-year-old boy. Not because Lucas had wronged him. Not because of jealousy or anger or any emotion a normal person might understand. She stopped directly in front of the jury. He did it because he was curious. Because he wanted to know what it felt like. He wrote those exact words in his journal. And then he went home, ate dinner with his family, and slept soundly in his bed while Lucas lay in a shallow grave less than 200 yards away. One of the jurors, a middle-aged woman in the front row, pressed a hand to her mouth. Over the next several days, you will hear testimony from detectives, forensic experts, and psychologists. You will see physical evidence linking the defendant to the crime scene. And you will read entries from his own journal, his own words, describing what he did in cold, clinical detail. Carmen turned back toward Ethan. The defense will tell you he's just a child. That he couldn't possibly understand the gravity of his actions. That he deserves sympathy, not punishment. She shook her head slowly. But Lucas Dellinger was a child too. And he's dead. Buried in the dirt by someone he called his best friend. She returned to her table. Sat down. We will prove beyond any reasonable doubt that Ethan Whitmore planned and executed the murder of Lucas Dellinger with full awareness of what he was doing. And we will ask you to hold him accountable. Not as a child. Not as a victim. But as the killer he chose to be. Silence hung over the courtroom. Heavy. Absolute. And in the gallery, Maria Dellinger sat perfectly still, tears streaming silently down her face. The defense's opening was a stark contrast. Gerald Hoffman rose slowly, buttoning his suit jacket, his expression somber and measured. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice soft, almost gentle. "My heart breaks for the Dellinger family. It truly does. No parent should ever have to bury a child. No community should have to endure a tragedy like this." He paused, shaking his head. But tragedy does not justify injustice. He walked toward the jury box, hands clasped behind his back. "You've heard a lot about Ethan Whitmore over the past few months. You've seen the headlines, the speculation, the rush to judgment. A 13-year-old boy has been painted as a monster before a single piece of evidence was presented in this courtroom." He gestured toward Ethan, who sat with his head slightly bowed. "Look at him. Really look at him. He's 14 years old. He weighs 110 pounds. He's never been in trouble with the law. He's an honor student. A chess champion. A child." Hoffman turned back to the jury. "The prosecution wants you to believe that this boy, this child, is a cold-blooded killer. They'll show you journal entries that could easily be the dark fantasies of a troubled adolescent. They'll present circumstantial evidence that proves proximity, not guilt." He leaned forward slightly. "But what they won't show you is motive. Real motive. What they won't explain is how a boy with no history of violence, no criminal record, no psychiatric diagnosis could suddenly commit an act of this magnitude." He shook his head again. "Because they can't. Because the truth is, the investigation was rushed. Shortcuts were taken. Assumptions were made. And now, a child's entire life hangs in the balance." He returned to his seat. "We don't deny that Lucas Dellinger's death is a tragedy. But Ethan Whitmore is not a monster. He's a boy. A scared, confused boy who has been thrust into a nightmare he can barely comprehend." He sat down. "We ask you to remember that, and to demand proof, real proof, before you destroy a child's life forever." The opening volleys had been fired. Two radically different portraits of the same boy. A calculated predator who murdered for curiosity. A troubled child caught in a storm he didn't create. The jury sat in silence, their faces unreadable. And Ethan Whitmore? Ethan Whitmore sat perfectly still, watching the proceedings with the same calm, detached interest he'd shown since the moment he walked through the courthouse doors. Like none of this was really about him. Like he was just a spectator, waiting to see how the story would end. The prosecution came out swinging. Day 2 of the trial. No more opening statements. No more promises. Now it was time to prove it. Carmen Reyes had spent months building this case, piece by piece, brick by brick. She knew the defense would try to poke holes in everything, question every fiber, challenge every footprint, cast doubt on every timeline. So she made her case airtight, or as close to airtight as humanly possible. And it started with the science. The first witness was Dr. Helena Marsh, forensic pathologist, 26 years of experience, consulted on over 2,000 cases. She had examined Lucas Dellinger's remains and prepared the official autopsy report. She took the stand in a charcoal gray suit, her silver hair cropped short, her demeanor calm and clinical. Carmen approached slowly. "Dr. Marsh, can you describe for the jury what you observed when you examined Lucas Dellinger's body?" Dr. Marsh nodded. The victim was an 11-year-old male, approximately 4 feet, 8 inches tall, 72 pounds. The body showed signs of early decomposition consistent with being buried for approximately 6 days. And the cause of death? Asphyxiation. Specifically, manual strangulation. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Someone in the gallery sobbed quietly. "Can you elaborate on that finding?" "Certainly." There was significant trauma to the hyoid bone, a small bone in the throat that commonly fractures during strangulation. Additionally, there was bruising around the neck consistent with sustained pressure from human hands. Carmen paused. Let the words settle. In your professional opinion, Dr. Marsh, was this death accidental? No. Could it have been self-inflicted? Absolutely not. What does the evidence tell you about the manner of death? Dr. Marsh looked directly at the jury. This was a homicide. The injuries were deliberate, sustained. The victim would have struggled, would have fought for air. This wasn't quick. It wasn't painless. She paused. Whoever did this held on until that little boy stopped breathing. Silence. Heavy. Absolute. In the gallery, Maria Dellinger bent forward, her face buried in her hands. A victim's advocate rubbed her back, whispering words of comfort that couldn't possibly help. And at the defense table, Ethan Whitmore sat motionless. His expression hadn't changed. The forensic evidence came next. A parade of experts took the stand, each one adding another layer to the case. First was the soil analysis. Dr. Raymond Cole, a geologist from Portland State University, testified that soil samples found on Ethan's sneakers matched the unique mineral composition of the burial site. Not just similar. Identical. It's a very specific match, he explained. The soil behind the Whitmore property contains elevated levels of iron oxide and decomposed organic matter. We found traces of that exact composition embedded in the treads of the defendant's shoes. Gerald Hoffman tried to challenge this on cross-examination. Isn't it possible those traces came from normal activity? Playing in the backyard? Walking through the woods? Possible, Dr. Cole admitted. But the concentration and location of the samples, deep within the tread, mixed with clay consistent with digging, suggests prolonged contact with freshly excavated earth. He looked at the jury. In my professional opinion, whoever wore those shoes did more than walk through those woods. They dug in that soil. Then came the fiber evidence. FBI forensic analyst Danielle Okonkwo presented her findings with meticulous precision. Fibers recovered from Lucas's clothing matched the material of Ethan's North Face jacket. Not just the same type of jacket. The same specific jacket, confirmed through microscopic comparison of wear patterns and dye lot variations. The fibers were found embedded in the victim's hoodie, Okonkwo testified, concentrated around the collar and shoulders, consistent with close physical contact. Carmen leaned forward. What kind of contact? Forceful contact. The distribution suggests the victim was grabbed, held tightly. On cross-examination, Hoffman tried again. Couldn't these fibers have transferred during normal interaction? A hug. Rough housing. The concentration is too high for casual contact, Okonkwo replied calmly. And the placement, primarily around the neck and upper chest, is consistent with someone gripping the victim from behind. Another brick in the wall. The shoe prints came next. Crime scene investigator Marcus Webb displayed enlarged photographs for the jury. Partial impressions recovered from the soft earth near the burial site. The prints match Nike Air Max sneakers, size 7, Webb explained. The same model and size worn by the defendant. How confident are you in this match? Carmen asked. Very confident. The tread pattern is distinctive. And we found a unique wear pattern on the right heel, a slight diagonal scrape, that matches the defendant's shoes exactly. He pointed to a side-by-side comparison. These aren't just the same type of shoe. These are the same shoes. Hoffman's cross-examination was brief. There wasn't much he could do. The physical evidence was damning. But the prosecution wasn't finished. On day 3, Detective Rosa Vance took the stand. She walked to the witness box with the quiet confidence of someone who had done this hundreds of times. Sat down. Adjusted the microphone. Met the eyes of the jury. Carmen began with the investigation timeline. The discovery of the body. The evidence collection. The interview with Ethan. And then she got to the journal. Detective Vance, can you describe how the defendant's journal was discovered? Rosa nodded. During the execution of a search warrant at the Whitmore residence, we conducted a thorough examination of the defendant's bedroom. Beneath a loose floorboard in his closet, we discovered a leather-bound journal. Was this hiding spot obvious? No. The floorboard appeared normal at first glance. We only noticed it because the nails had been recently removed and replaced. Someone had gone to considerable effort to conceal this journal. Carmen picked up the journal, now sealed in an evidence bag, and showed it to the jury. And what did you find inside? Rosa took a breath. Entries dating back approximately 8 weeks before the murder. The defendant documented his observations of Lucas Dellinger in clinical, detached language. He noted Lucas's routines, his vulnerabilities, his level of trust. She paused. He referred to Lucas as the subject throughout. Another murmur from the gallery. Did the defendant describe planning the murder? Yes. Multiple entries detail his preparations. Selecting the location. Digging the grave. Timing the act for when Lucas's mother would be at work and his own parents would be occupied. And the entry from October 14th? Rosa recited from memory. She didn't need to look at the journal. The words were burned into her brain. Execution complete. Subject expired quickly. Less resistance than anticipated. Emotional response on my part. Negligible. Interesting data point. Someone in the gallery let out a choked cry. Carmen let the silence stretch. Detective Vance, in your 22 years of investigating homicides, have you ever encountered anything like this? Rosa looked at the jury, then at Ethan, then back at the jury. No, she said quietly. I haven't. Day 4 brought the most emotional testimony of the trial. Maria Dellinger took the stand. She was thin, pale, aged 10 years in the span of 3 months. Her hands trembled as she was sworn in. Carmen approached gently. Mrs. Dellinger, I know this is incredibly difficult, but can you tell the jury about your son? Maria nodded, swallowed hard. He was my everything. Her voice cracked. He was such a good boy. Never complained. Never asked for things he knew we couldn't afford. He just wanted to make people happy. She wiped her eyes with a tissue. Every morning, he'd leave me a little note. Have a good day, Mom. I love you. Every single morning. Even when I was too tired to notice. Even when I forgot to say thank you. She broke down. I kept every one. I have 847 notes. 847 notes from my baby. The courtroom was silent except for her sobs. Carmen gave her a moment. Then continued softly. Mrs. Dellinger, did Lucas ever talk about Ethan Whitmore? Maria nodded. All the time. He idolized Ethan. Said he was the coolest kid he'd ever met. Said Ethan was teaching him things. Making him smarter. She looked at Ethan for the first time. He trusted you, she whispered. He thought you were his friend. Ethan's expression didn't change. Maria's face twisted with grief and rage. How could you? She screamed. He was just a little boy. He loved you. The bailiff stepped forward. The judge called for order. Maria collapsed into sobs, led gently from the stand by the victim's advocate. And through it all, Ethan Whitmore sat perfectly still. Not a flinch. Not a tear. Not a single flicker of emotion. Like he was watching television. The prosecution rested on day 5. They had presented overwhelming physical evidence. Expert testimony. The journal. The timeline. And the devastating, heartbreaking words of a mother who had lost everything. The case against Ethan Whitmore was as strong as any case Carmen Reyes had ever built. Now it was the defense's turn. And everyone in that courtroom knew the same thing. Gerald Hoffman had an almost impossible task ahead of him. Because the evidence wasn't just speaking. It was screaming. Gerald Hoffman knew he was in trouble. You could see it in the way he shuffled his papers. The way he whispered urgently with his co-counsel during breaks. The way his confident stride from opening statements had become something slower, more hesitant. The prosecution had delivered a devastating case. Physical evidence. Expert testimony. That damning journal. Maria Dellinger's gut-wrenching breakdown on the stand. Every day, the hole got deeper. And now it was Hoffman's turn to try to dig his client out. He had one strategy left. One desperate play that could either save Ethan Whitmore or bury him forever. He was going to put Ethan on the stand. The decision sent shockwaves through the legal community. Putting a defendant on the stand is always risky. Putting a juvenile defendant accused of murder on the stand? That's borderline insane. Cross-examination is brutal, unforgiving. A skilled prosecutor can twist words, expose lies, shatter carefully constructed narratives in minutes. And Carmen Reyes was very, very skilled. But Hoffman was out of options. His expert witnesses had been underwhelming. A child psychologist who testified about adolescent brain development was picked apart on cross-examination. A forensic specialist who questioned the soil analysis was contradicted by his own published research. Nothing was working. The only card left to play was Ethan himself. The theory was simple. Let the jury see a child. A scared, confused, sympathetic child. Let them hear his voice, see his youth, feel uncomfortable about sending a 14-year-old to prison for the rest of his life. It was a Hail Mary. And it was about to backfire spectacularly. Day 6 of the trial. The gallery was packed tighter than ever. Word had spread that Ethan would testify. Reporters fought for seats. The line outside the courthouse stretched around the block. Everyone wanted to hear what the boy genius killer had to say. At 9:15 a.m., Gerald Hoffman stood. The defense calls Ethan Whitmore to the stand. A hush fell over the room. Ethan rose slowly, straightened his tie, walked to the witness box with measured steps. He was sworn in, his voice clear and steady. I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. He sat down, folded his hands, looked at the jury with those bright blue eyes. Composed. Ready. Hoffman started gently. Ethan, I know this is difficult. But I want you to tell the jury, in your own words, about your friendship with Lucas Dellinger. Ethan nodded. Lucas was a nice kid. Kind of shy. He didn't have a lot of friends, so I tried to include him. Let him come over. Play video games. Stuff like that. Did you care about Lucas? Yes. He was like a little brother to me. And on October 14th, the day Lucas disappeared, where were you? Ethan took a breath. Looked down. The picture of a boy trying to remember. I was home. Doing homework. Playing video games. I didn't see Lucas that day. The prosecution claims Lucas left a note saying he was coming to your house. I don't know why he wrote that. Maybe he planned to come over and changed his mind. Maybe he went somewhere else. I don't know. But he never showed up. Hoffman nodded sympathetically. And the journal entries. The prosecution has made a lot of those. Can you explain them? Ethan hesitated, bit his lip, a gesture that seemed almost rehearsed. Those were creative writing exercises. I was working on a story. A dark story. I know it looks bad, but it wasn't real. It was fiction. Fiction. Yes. I was interested in psychology, in what makes people do terrible things. I was exploring those themes through writing. I never meant for anyone to see it. And I never actually did any of those things. He looked at the jury with wide, earnest eyes. I didn't kill Lucas. I swear. He was my friend. Hoffman continued for another 30 minutes. He walked Ethan through his childhood, his academic achievements, his chess trophies, his science fair awards. He painted a picture of a gifted but misunderstood boy, a kid who processed the world differently, who expressed himself through dark creative outlets, who was now being crucified for having an unconventional imagination. By the time Hoffman sat down, some members of the jury looked uncertain. Maybe, just maybe, there was reasonable doubt. Then Carmen Reyes stood up, and everything changed. Carmen didn't rush. She approached the witness stand slowly, deliberately, like a predator circling prey. "Ethan," she began, her voice calm, almost friendly. "You said you were working on a creative writing project. A dark story." "Yes." "And the journal entries, the ones describing Lucas as the subject, documenting his routines, planning his murder, those were all fiction?" "Yes." "Just your imagination?" "Yes." Carmen nodded slowly. "Tell me about your story, then. What was the plot? Who was the main character? What was the narrative arc?" Silence. Ethan blinked. It wasn't fully developed. It was more like notes. Ideas. Notes and ideas for a story you never actually wrote? "I was still working on it. For 8 weeks. You took detailed notes for 8 weeks, describing a murder in meticulous detail, but you never actually started the story." "I'm a planner. I like to prepare." Carmen picked up the journal, flipped to a specific page. "Let me read this entry from October 3rd. Location secured. Excavation complete. Estimate 45 minutes for full burial. Will require tarp to transport soil discreetly." She looked up. "That sounds less like a creative writing note and more like a to-do list." Ethan's jaw tightened. "It's still fiction." "Fiction that happens to match the exact location where Lucas's body was found? Fiction that accurately describes the burial site, the depth of the grave, the soil composition." "Coincidence." "Quite a coincidence." Carmen moved closer. "Let's talk about October 14th. You said Lucas never came to your house that day." "That's right. But his note, the one he left for his mother, specifically said he was going to your house. Maybe he changed his mind. Or maybe he did come over. And maybe you led him into those woods, just like you planned in your fiction." "That's not what happened." "No." "Then explain the soil on your shoes. The soil that matches the exact burial site." "I walk in those woods all the time." "You walk through freshly dug graves?" "Objection!" Hoffman shouted. "Withdrawn," Carmen said smoothly. She didn't need the answer. The jury had already heard enough. She picked up another evidence bag, held it up for the jury to see. "This is your jacket. The North Face jacket you wore during the search for Lucas. The jacket whose fibers were found embedded in his clothing. Around his neck. Around his shoulders." Ethan's calm was starting to crack. Tiny fractures appearing in the mask. "I hugged him at the vigil. The fibers transferred then." "The vigil was after his body was found. After he'd been in the ground for 6 days. Are you suggesting fibers from a hug somehow appeared on a corpse that was buried before you ever touched him?" "I don't know how it happened. I just know I didn't do it." "You don't know how it happened," Carmen repeated slowly. "Just like you don't know why Lucas wrote he was coming to your house. Just like you don't know how your shoe prints ended up at the burial site. Just like you don't know why your journal reads like a murder manual." She leaned closer. "A lot of things you don't know, Ethan." Carmen paused. Let the tension build. Then she asked the question that would end everything. "Ethan, when Lucas was dying, when he was struggling to breathe, looking up at you with those big brown eyes, begging you to stop, did you feel anything?" The courtroom held its breath. Hoffman shot to his feet. "Objection. Assumes facts not in evidence." "I'll rephrase," Carmen said calmly. "Ethan, your journal entry from October 14th says, and I quote, 'Emotional response on my part, negligible.' Can you explain what you meant by that?" Ethan stared at her. The mask was slipping. You could see it in his eyes. The frustration. The anger. The realization that he was losing control. "It was fiction," he said through gritted teeth. Fiction. Right. Carmen nodded. So let me ask you directly. Did you kill Lucas Dellinger? No. Did you lure him into those woods? No. Did you strangle him until he stopped breathing? No. Did you bury him in a hole you dug yourself, then go home and eat dinner with your family like nothing happened? No. Ethan's voice cracked. His composure shattered. He gripped the witness stand, knuckles white. I didn't do it. You can't prove I did. You have fibers and shoe prints and a stupid journal, but you don't have proof. You don't have a witness. You don't have anything real. He was breathing hard now, face flushed, eyes wild. And then, in a moment that would be replayed millions of times, he said something that changed everything. He was nobody. He was just some pathetic kid who followed me around like a lost puppy. Why would I waste my time killing someone who didn't even matter? Silence. Absolute. Deafening. Silence. Carmen Reyes didn't move. She didn't need to. Ethan realized what he'd said. His face went pale. His mouth opened, but no words came out. In the gallery, Maria Dellinger let out a wail that would haunt everyone who heard it. And the jury? The jury stared at Ethan Whitmore like they were seeing him for the first time. Not a scared child. Not a misunderstood genius. A monster. Carmen turned slowly, walked back to her table, sat down. No further questions, Your Honor. The courtroom never recovered. Not after what Ethan said. Those words, he was nobody, someone who didn't even matter, hung in the air like poison. You could feel them seeping into the walls, into the jury box, into the minds of everyone who heard them. Gerald Hoffman tried to do damage control. He asked for a recess, requested a sidebar with the judge, even attempted to argue that his client's outburst was the result of stress and should be disregarded. Judge Wayland denied every request. The witnesses' statements were made voluntarily, under oath, during cross-examination, she said flatly. They will remain part of the record. Hoffman slumped in his chair. He knew it was over. Everyone knew it was over. Closing arguments came the next morning. Carmen Reyes went first. She stood before the jury, calm and measured, her voice carrying the weight of everything that had been presented over the past week. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to think about Lucas Dellinger. She held up his photograph. That gap-toothed smile. Those trusting brown eyes. 11 years old. Shy. Desperate for a friend. He found one in Ethan Whitmore, or at least he thought he did. She set the photograph down gently. But Ethan Whitmore was never Lucas's friend. To Ethan, Lucas was a subject. An experiment. A curiosity to be studied, used, and discarded. She walked slowly toward the jury box. You've heard the evidence. The soil from the burial site embedded in the defendant's shoes. The fibers from his jacket found on Lucas's body. The shoe prints matching his exact size and wear pattern. The timeline that places him at the scene when Lucas disappeared. She paused. And then there's the journal. 8 weeks of planning. Observations about Lucas's routines. Notes about digging the grave. And that entry from October 14th, execution complete. Subject expired quickly. Emotional response on my part, negligible. Carmen let the words echo. The defense wants you to believe this was fiction. Creative writing. The dark imaginings of a gifted child exploring psychological themes. She shook her head. But you heard the defendant yesterday. You heard him, under pressure, reveal exactly who he is. He was nobody. Someone who didn't even matter. Her voice hardened. That's not fiction. That's not creative writing. That's the truth. The cold, callous truth of what Ethan Whitmore really thought about the little boy who trusted him. The little boy he murdered. She returned to the center of the room. The defense will tell you that you can't convict a child. That sending a 14-year-old to prison is cruel. That there must be another explanation. She looked at each juror in turn. But Lucas Dellinger was a child too. He was 11 years old. He deserved to grow up, to become a veterinarian, to adopt the dog he always dreamed about, to write notes to his mother for another 50 years. Her voice cracked slightly, just for a moment. He didn't get that chance, because Ethan Whitmore took it from him, deliberately, premeditatedly, without remorse. She straightened. The defendant is not a victim. He is not a misunderstood genius. He is a killer who planned a murder, executed it, and felt nothing. And he needs to be held accountable. She sat down. The state asks for a verdict of guilty on all counts. For Lucas. For his mother. For justice. Silence. Gerald Hoffman's closing was the performance of a desperate man. He talked about reasonable doubt, about circumstantial evidence, about the dangers of convicting a child based on a journal that might have been fiction. He talked about Ethan's age, his potential, the life that could be destroyed by an unjust verdict. He pleaded with the jury to see beyond the headlines, to question the prosecution's narrative, to remember that a boy's entire future hung in the balance. But his words felt hollow, empty, like he didn't even believe them himself. Because every time he said reasonable doubt, the jury looked at Ethan. And they remembered what he said. He was nobody. Someone who didn't even matter. Judge Wayland delivered her instructions to the jury at 11:47 a.m. She explained the charges. First-degree murder. Premeditated. Aggravated by the victim's age and vulnerability. She explained the standard of proof. Beyond a reasonable doubt. The highest burden in the legal system. She explained their duty. To weigh the evidence. To set aside emotion. To render a verdict based solely on the facts presented. And then she sent them to deliberate. The jury was out for 3 hours and 42 minutes. 3 hours and 42 minutes. For a case this complex, this emotional, this nationally watched. That was fast. Devastatingly fast. When the bailiff announced that the jury had reached a verdict, the courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled for their seats. Cameras were repositioned. The gallery filled to capacity within minutes. Maria Dellinger sat in the front row, flanked by her sister and a victim's advocate. Her hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Her eyes were fixed on the door through which the jury would enter. The Whitmores sat on the opposite side. Caroline looked like she hadn't slept in days. Richard stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. And at the defense table, Ethan Whitmore sat perfectly still. His composure was back. The mask had been reassembled. He looked almost bored, like this was just another tedious obligation he had to endure. But if you looked closely, really closely, you could see something in his eyes. A flicker. Just a flicker. Uncertainty. The jury filed in at 3:29 p.m. 12 faces. Unreadable. Solemn. They didn't look at Ethan. That was the first sign. Judge Wayland addressed the foreperson, a woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair and a schoolteacher's steady gaze. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. Please hand the verdict form to the bailiff. The slip of paper traveled from the foreperson to the bailiff to the judge. Judge Wayland unfolded it. Read it silently. Her expression revealed nothing. She handed it back to the bailiff. The defendant will rise. Ethan stood. Gerald Hoffman stood beside him, one hand on his client's shoulder. The foreperson received the verdict form back. In the matter of the state of Oregon versus Ethan Michael Whitmore, on the charge of murder in the first degree, how does the jury find? The foreperson looked up. Her eyes met Ethan's for just a moment. Then she spoke. Guilty. The word detonated like a bomb. The gallery exploded. Maria Dellinger collapsed into her sister's arms, sobbing. Reporters were already typing furiously, sending updates to their networks. Cameras flashed. Voices rose. Order. Judge Wayland slammed her gavel. I will have order in this courtroom. The noise subsided. Barely. But Rosa watched Ethan. She watched the moment the word hit him. Guilty. His face didn't change. Not at first. He stood there, perfectly still, like he was processing the information, running it through that brilliant, calculating mind. And then, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, something shifted. The mask cracked. Just a little. His lip trembled. His eyes widened slightly. His hands, hanging at his sides, began to shake. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, Ethan Whitmore looked like what he actually was. A 14-year-old boy who had just realized his life was over. But he didn't break. Not yet. He swallowed hard. Steadied himself. Forced the mask back into place. When he sat down, his face was neutral again. Controlled. Gerald Hoffman leaned over, whispering urgently about appeals. About motions. About next steps. Ethan nodded along. But he wasn't really listening. He was already thinking about sentencing. He was already calculating. Juvenile offender. First offense. No prior criminal record. Surely the judge would be lenient. Surely she would see that he was just a kid. That a few years in a juvenile facility would be sufficient. That he'd be out by 21, maybe even sooner. He'd made a mistake on the stand. Let his emotions get the better of him. But that didn't mean everything was lost. He was still smart. Still special. Still Ethan Whitmore. The system couldn't really destroy him. Could it? Judge Wayland set the sentencing date for 2 weeks later. October 28, 2020. Almost exactly 1 year after Lucas Dellinger was laid to rest. This court is adjourned, she said, slamming her gavel one final time. As the courtroom emptied, Ethan was led away by bailiffs. He walked with his head high, back straight, chin up, still playing the part, still believing he would win. He had no idea what was coming. October 28, 2020. Sentencing Day. 1 year to the day since Lucas Dellinger was buried in a cold, shallow grave behind the Whitmore property. 1 year since Maria Dellinger's world shattered into a million pieces. 1 year since Ethan Whitmore ate pot roast with his family and slept soundly in his bed, believing he had gotten away with murder. Now, finally, it was time to pay. The courthouse was a circus. Barriers had been erected to hold back the crowds. Protesters lined both sides of the street, some demanding maximum punishment, others arguing that a child shouldn't be sentenced as an adult. Signs waved in the cold October air. Justice for Lucas. Children are not monsters. Lock him up forever. Rehabilitation, not revenge. News helicopters circled overhead. Satellite trucks stretched for blocks. Every major network had sent their top anchors to cover the sentencing live. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. The conclusion of the most watched criminal case in a decade. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was suffocating. Every seat was filled. Every inch of standing room occupied. The air was thick with tension, with grief, with anticipation. Maria Dellinger sat in the front row of the gallery. She wore a simple black dress. No jewelry. No makeup. She looked exhausted, hollowed out by a year of grief and the brutal ordeal of the trial. But there was something else in her eyes now. Something that hadn't been there before. Resolve. She was ready for this to end. The Whitmores sat on the opposite side, separated from Maria by the center aisle. Caroline Whitmore looked like a ghost of the polished attorney who had threatened lawsuits and demanded respect just 1 year ago. Her hair was limp. Her designer clothes hung loosely on a frame that had lost 20 pounds. Dark circles ringed her eyes. Richard Whitmore sat beside her, stiff and silent. His jaw was clenched so tight you could see the muscles twitching beneath his skin. He stared straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge the cameras, the whispers, the judgment. They had spent a fortune on appeals. Filed every motion imaginable. Hired new lawyers, new experts, new consultants. Nothing had worked. Their perfect son was about to be sentenced for murder. And there was nothing they could do to stop it. At 9 a.m. sharp, the bailiff called the court to order. All rise. The Honorable Judge Patricia Wayland presiding. The room stood as one. Judge Wayland entered and took her seat. She looked older than she had at the start of the trial. Wearier. Like this case had taken something from her too. She surveyed the courtroom. The packed gallery. The anxious attorneys. The defendant standing at his table in a crisp navy suit. "Be seated," she said. Everyone sat. The moment had arrived. "We are here today for the sentencing of Ethan Michael Whitmore," Judge Wayland began, "who has been found guilty by a jury of his peers of murder in the first degree." She paused, adjusted her reading glasses. "Before I deliver the sentence, I will hear statements from both parties." Ms. Reyes. Carmen Reyes stood. "Your Honor, the state recommends the maximum sentence allowable under Oregon law. The defendant has shown no remorse for his actions. He planned and executed the murder of an 11-year-old child with chilling premeditation. He mocked the victim's memory during his testimony. He has demonstrated, at every opportunity, that he views this crime as a game, and human life as worthless." She took a breath. "Lucas Dellinger deserves justice. His mother deserves closure. And society deserves protection from an individual who has shown himself to be profoundly dangerous. We ask the court to impose a sentence that reflects the gravity of this crime and ensures that the defendant never has the opportunity to harm another innocent child." She sat down. Gerald Hoffman rose slowly. He looked defeated. His shoulders sagged. His voice lacked the confidence it had carried during opening statements. "Your Honor, I ask the court to consider the defendant's age. He was 13 years old when this crime was committed. 13. His brain was not fully developed. His judgment was impaired by factors beyond his control." He gestured weakly toward Ethan. "This is a child. A troubled child, yes. A child who made a terrible, unforgivable mistake. But a child nonetheless. Oregon law provides for judicial discretion in cases involving juvenile defendants. I implore the court to exercise that discretion, to allow for the possibility of rehabilitation, to give this young man a chance, however small, to someday become a productive member of society." He sat down. The words hung in the air, empty, unconvincing. Judge Wayland turned to the defendant. "Mr. Whitmore, you have the right to make a statement before I deliver your sentence. Do you wish to exercise that right?" Gerald Hoffman leaned toward Ethan, whispering urgently. His message was clear. Say something remorseful. Apologize. Show any sign of humanity. Ethan brushed him off. He straightened his tie, stood up straight, and leaned toward the microphone with an expression that could only be described as smug. "Yeah," he said. "I have something to say." The courtroom tensed. Ethan smiled. "I'd like to thank the Academy." For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then the gallery exploded. Gasps, sobs, shouts of outrage. Someone screamed, "Monster!" Another yelled, "Rot in hell!" Maria Dellinger made a sound, a strangled, anguished cry that cut through the chaos like a knife. Caroline Whitmore buried her face in her hands. Richard Whitmore closed his eyes, his face crumbling. Gerald Hoffman stood frozen, mouth open, unable to comprehend what his client had just done. And Ethan? Ethan leaned back from the microphone, that smirk still plastered on his face. Satisfied. Triumphant. Like he'd just delivered the punchline to a joke only he understood. "Order." Judge Wayland slammed her gavel so hard it echoed like a gunshot. "I will have order in this courtroom." The noise subsided. Slowly, reluctantly, Judge Wayland stared at Ethan. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes burned with something cold and hard. "Mr. Whitmore," she said slowly, "is that your complete statement?" Ethan shrugged. "That's it." Judge Wayland nodded. "Very well." She removed her reading glasses, set them on the bench, folded her hands, and then she spoke. "I have presided over this court for 30 years. I have sentenced murderers, rapists, and predators of every kind. I have seen remorse and I have seen defiance. I have seen criminals break down in tears and I have seen them curse my name as they were led away." She paused. "I have never, in 30 years, encountered a defendant like you." Her voice was measured, controlled, but underneath, something simmered. "You planned the murder of Lucas Dellinger with meticulous precision. You documented your preparations in a journal like a scientist recording an experiment. You lured a child who trusted you into the woods, ended his life, and buried him in a hole you dug yourself. Then you went home, ate dinner, and slept in your bed while his mother searched the streets, calling his name." She leaned forward. "You joined the search parties. You comforted his grieving mother. You gave interviews pleading for his safe return, all while knowing exactly where his body was." Her voice hardened. "And when you were caught, when the evidence proved beyond any doubt what you had done, you showed no remorse. You treated this trial as a performance. You mocked the victim's mother from the witness stand. And just now, given one final chance to show any shred of humanity, you made a joke." She shook her head slowly. "You believe you are special, Mr. Whitmore. You believe your intelligence places you above consequences, above the law, above basic human decency." She straightened. "You are wrong." Judge Wayland opened a folder in front of her. Oregon law provides for the sentencing of juvenile offenders as adults in cases of exceptional premeditation and complete absence of remorse. After careful consideration of all factors, I find that this case meets those criteria. She looked directly at Ethan. "Ethan Michael Whitmore, I hereby sentence you to life imprisonment, with no possibility of parole until you have served a minimum of 47 years. She paused to let the number land. "You are 14 years old. You will not be eligible for parole consideration until you are 61. Silence. Absolute. Crushing. And then, finally, the mask shattered. Ethan's face went white. Not pale. White. Like every drop of blood had drained from his body in an instant. His mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. No sound came out. His legs began to shake. "No," he whispered. "No. No, no, no." His voice rose. "No. You can't. I'm just a kid. I'm just a kid." He grabbed the table. His knees buckled. He collapsed forward, catching himself on the edge, then sliding to the floor. "I'm 14," he screamed. "I'm 14 years old. You can't do this to me. This isn't fair. This isn't fair." Tears streamed down his face. His body convulsed with sobs. The composed, arrogant, untouchable genius was gone, replaced by a terrified child finally understanding what he had done, what he had lost, what awaited him. 47 years. His entire youth. His adulthood. His middle age. Gone. Erased in a single sentence. Bailiffs rushed forward. They lifted Ethan from the floor. He thrashed weakly, still screaming. "Please. Please. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I didn't mean any of it." But his pleas echoed off the walls and disappeared. Too late. Far too late. Caroline Whitmore collapsed in her seat, wailing. Richard Whitmore sat frozen, staring at nothing, tears running silently down his cheeks. Gerald Hoffman slumped in his chair, head in his hands. And in the front row of the gallery, Maria Dellinger sat perfectly still. Tears streamed down her face. But she wasn't sobbing. She was breathing. For the first time in a year, maybe for the first time since October 14, 2019, she could finally breathe. As the bailiffs dragged Ethan toward the side door, Judge Wayland spoke one final time. "This court is adjourned." She slammed her gavel. The sound echoed through the silent courtroom. And Ethan Whitmore's screams faded into the hallway, growing fainter and fainter until they disappeared entirely. The footage played everywhere. On every news channel. Every website. Every social media platform. Ethan Whitmore collapsing. screaming, being dragged from the courtroom by bailiffs while his parents sobbed in the gallery. "I'm just a kid. I'm just a kid." The clip was viewed over 50 million times in the first 24 hours. It was dissected by legal analysts, debated by psychologists, memed by teenagers who had never followed the trial. Some people cheered. Finally, justice. Finally, consequences for a monster who thought he was untouchable. Others expressed discomfort. Was it right to celebrate a child's breakdown? To replay his screams like entertainment? To take pleasure in watching a 14-year-old realize his life was over? The debate raged for weeks. But in the end, one thing was undeniable. Ethan Whitmore was no longer smirking. The appeals began immediately. Gerald Hoffman filed the first motion within 72 hours of sentencing. Cruel and unusual punishment. Ineffective assistance of counsel. Judicial bias. Prosecutorial misconduct. Every possible argument. Every legal avenue. The Whitmores spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on new attorneys. Specialists in appellate law. Experts in juvenile justice. Former judges who now worked as consultants. They fought for 2 years. And they lost. Every appeal was denied. Every motion rejected. Every argument dismissed. The Oregon Court of Appeals upheld the sentence. The state Supreme Court declined to hear the case. A federal habeas petition was thrown out within months. The legal system had spoken. And its answer was final. Ethan Whitmore spent his first 4 years at the McLaren Youth Correctional Facility. It was the standard path for juvenile offenders tried as adults: serve the early years in a youth facility, then transfer to adult prison upon reaching a certain age. McLaren was not like anything Ethan had ever experienced. No private bedroom. No video games. No parents to shield him from consequences. No teachers treating him like a special genius who deserved extra attention. Just concrete walls. Strict schedules. Other juvenile offenders who didn't care about his IQ or his chess trophies. The reports from his first months were troubling. Ethan refused to participate in group therapy. He was dismissive of counselors who tried to engage him. He treated educational programs with open contempt, telling one teacher that he already knew more than she ever would. His arrogance, it seemed, had survived the sentencing. But it didn't last. The breaking point came about 8 months in. Details are scarce, juvenile facility records are protected, but what emerged later painted a grim picture. Ethan had made enemies. His condescending attitude. His refusal to show respect. His obvious belief that he was better than everyone around him. In a place like McLaren, that kind of arrogance doesn't go unnoticed. There was an incident. A confrontation with other inmates. Guards intervened before serious injury occurred, but Ethan spent 2 weeks in the medical wing. When he emerged, something had changed. The arrogance was gone. Not replaced by remorse. Exactly. Not replaced by anything recognizable. Just gone. Ethan stopped talking. Stopped engaging. Stopped doing much of anything. He attended mandatory programs in silence. He ate meals alone. He stared at walls for hours. The psychologists called it adjustment disorder. But the guards who watched him every day had a simpler term: broken. At 18, Ethan Whitmore was transferred to the Oregon State Penitentiary. Adult prison. Maximum security. He arrived weighing 30 pounds less than he had at his trial. His blonde hair had been buzzed short. His bright blue eyes, once so confident, now stared blankly ahead. He was assigned to a single-person cell. Protective custody. Too high profile, too infamous to be placed in the general population. The warden later told reporters that Ethan spoke fewer than 20 words during his entire intake process. Name. Date of birth. Yes. No. That was it. The boy genius who had once delivered theatrical statements to news cameras now answered questions in monosyllables. Years passed. The world moved on. New crimes captured national attention. New trials became media sensations. Ethan Whitmore faded from headlines, becoming just another name in the long list of killers who had briefly fascinated America. Occasionally, a documentary would revisit the case. A true crime podcast would do an episode. A psychology journal would publish a paper analyzing Ethan's behavior. But for the most part, he was forgotten. Exactly what he had feared most. Caroline and Richard Whitmore divorced 3 years after the sentencing. The marriage couldn't survive what had happened. The blame. The guilt. The constant reminders of who their son had become. Caroline left Oregon entirely. Moved to the East Coast. Changed her last name. Tried to build a life where nobody knew she was the mother of the boy genius killer. Richard stayed in Portland. Continued his surgical practice. But colleagues said he was never the same. Quieter. More withdrawn. Prone to long silences and sudden departures from social gatherings. He visited Ethan once a month for the first 2 years. Then once every few months. Then once a year. Then not at all. The last confirmed visit was in 2025. 5 years after the sentencing. After that, Ethan Whitmore had no visitors. And what about Maria Dellinger? She stayed in Cedar Mill. Some people thought she would leave. Start fresh somewhere nobody knew her story. Escape the constant reminders of what she had lost. But Maria didn't want to escape. She wanted to remember. She kept Lucas's room exactly as he had left it. His dinosaur posters on the walls. His books on the shelf. His rescue dog plush toy on the pillow. She visited his grave every Sunday. Brought fresh flowers. Talked to him about her week. Told him she loved him and missed him. And she became an advocate. Maria founded an organization called Lucas's Light, a non-profit dedicated to supporting families of violent crime victims. She spoke at schools about the warning signs of violent behavior in children. She lobbied for stronger protections for vulnerable kids. She channeled her grief into purpose. It didn't bring Lucas back. Nothing could do that. But it gave her a reason to keep going. 3 days after the sentencing, Maria gave her only interview. She sat across from a journalist in her small apartment. The same apartment where Lucas had written her 847 notes. The same kitchen where he'd grabbed a granola bar before walking out the door forever. The journalist asked how she felt about the sentence. Maria was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke. "I'll never have my son back. No sentence can change that. No amount of punishment will bring Lucas home." She paused. But today, for the first time since October 14, 2019, I could breathe. I could close my eyes without seeing his face in that grave. I could think about his smile without immediately thinking about how he died. Tears ran down her cheeks. Is that justice? I don't know. I honestly don't know what justice means anymore. But it's something. It's a start. She looked directly at the camera. I hope Ethan Whitmore lives a long life. I hope he lives every single one of those 47 years. I hope he wakes up every morning in that cell and remembers what he did. I hope he understands, eventually, what he took from me. From Lucas. From the world. Her voice hardened. I hope he never knows another moment of peace. Somewhere in the Oregon State Penitentiary, in a small cell with a narrow window that faced a concrete wall, Ethan Whitmore sat on his cot. He was 19 years old now. He had been incarcerated for 5 years. He had 42 more to go before he would even be considered for parole. He didn't read anymore. Didn't play chess. Didn't do much of anything except exist. The genius had nothing left to prove. The arrogance had nothing left to protect. There was just time. Endless. Crushing. Inescapable time. And the memories he could never outrun. A guard walked past his cell on evening rounds. Whitmore. Lights out in 10. Ethan didn't respond. He just sat there, staring at the wall. The smirk was gone. The confidence was gone. Everything was gone, except the silence. And the years stretching ahead like an endless, empty road. Here we are, at the end of the story. The story of a boy who had everything, and threw it all away because he believed he was untouchable. The story of a child who trusted the wrong person and paid with his life. The story of a mother who lost everything and somehow found the strength to keep going. And the story of a courtroom moment that captivated the world, the moment a smirking killer finally understood that he wasn't as special as he thought. I've told you a lot of facts over the past hour. Dates, locations, evidence, testimony. But now, as we wrap up, I want to step back and talk about what this story really means. Because it's not just about Ethan Whitmore. It's about something bigger. Something we all need to understand. Let's start with the obvious question. How does a 13-year-old become a killer? Psychologists have debated this for years. They've analyzed Ethan's case from every angle. Nature versus nurture. Brain development. Genetic predisposition. Environmental factors. Some pointed to his narcissistic tendencies, the grandiose self-image, the lack of empathy, the belief that rules didn't apply to him. These traits were documented early. Teachers noticed. A psychologist flagged concerns. The warning signs were there. But nothing was done. His parents dismissed the red flags as quirks of genius. They protected him, enabled him, told him he was special so many times that he believed it with every fiber of his being. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Ethan Whitmore didn't become a monster overnight. He was shaped, molded, allowed to develop without boundaries, without consequences, without anyone ever telling him no. Does that excuse what he did? Absolutely not. He made a choice. A deliberate, premeditated choice to end Lucas Dellinger's life. He alone is responsible for that. But his story is a warning. A warning about what happens when arrogance goes unchecked. When brilliance is treated as a substitute for character. When parents see what they want to see instead of what's actually there. And then there's Lucas. Sweet, shy, trusting Lucas. He did nothing wrong. He was just a kid looking for a friend. A kid who wanted to belong. A kid who saw kindness where there was only manipulation. His death is a tragedy that should never have happened. But if there's any meaning to be found in his loss, it's this. We need to protect vulnerable children. We need to teach them about healthy relationships. About recognizing manipulation. About trusting their instincts when something feels wrong. Lucas trusted Ethan because Ethan was nice to him. Because Ethan paid attention to him. Because Ethan filled a void that loneliness had created. Predators, whether they're adults or other children, know how to exploit that loneliness. They know how to spot the kids who are desperate for connection. They know how to build trust before they betray it. We can't wrap our children in bubble wrap. We can't protect them from everything. But we can talk to them. Listen to them. Make sure they never feel so alone that a monster's attention seems like a gift. Now let's talk about justice. Did Ethan Whitmore get what he deserved? Opinions vary. They always do. Some believe 47 years is too harsh for a crime committed at 13. They argue that children can change. That the brain isn't fully developed until the mid-20s. That rehabilitation should be the goal, not permanent punishment. Others believe the sentence wasn't harsh enough. That Lucas Dellinger's life was worth more than any prison term. That someone capable of such calculated cruelty at such a young age will never be safe to release. I'm not here to tell you which side is right. But I will say this. The justice system did its job. Evidence was gathered. A trial was held. A jury deliberated. A sentence was delivered. It wasn't perfect. No system ever is. But Lucas Dellinger was not forgotten. His death was not ignored. His killer was held accountable. And for Maria Dellinger, for the mother who held 847 handwritten notes from a son she would never see again, that mattered. That mattered more than any of us can probably understand. Let me leave you with one final image. It's 2024 now. 4 years since the sentencing. Somewhere in Oregon, Maria Dellinger wakes up on a Sunday morning. She makes herself a cup of coffee. She drives to a quiet cemetery on the edge of Cedar Mill. She walks past rows of headstones until she reaches a small one near a maple tree. Lucas James Dellinger. Beloved son. Forever in our hearts. She kneels down. Places a bouquet of sunflowers, Lucas's favorite, against the stone. And she talks to him. She tells him about her week. About Lucas's light and the families they've helped. About the dog she finally adopted, a rescue mutt named Buddy who sleeps at the foot of her bed. She tells him she misses him. That she thinks about him every day. That she keeps his room exactly the way he left it, even though people tell her she should move on. She tells him she loves him. And then, before she leaves, she pulls a folded piece of paper from her pocket. It's one of his notes. One of the 847. She reads it out loud, her voice cracking. Have a good day, Mom. I love you. She presses the note to her heart. And she breathes. 20 miles away, in a concrete cell, Ethan Whitmore stares at a wall. He's 24 years old now. He's been in prison for almost a decade. He has 37 more years before he'll even be considered for parole. He doesn't get visitors. He doesn't write letters. He doesn't participate in programs or engage with counselors. He just exists. The genius mind that once planned a murder with scientific precision now has nothing to analyze, nothing to solve, nothing to prove. The arrogance that once convinced him he was untouchable has been ground down by years of monotony and isolation. He's not smirking anymore. He's not making jokes. He's just empty. A shell of the golden boy who once stood on the front porch of a beautiful house on Maple Ridge Lane, inviting a lonely kid to come see something cool in the woods. Some people might feel sorry for him. Some people might see a young man wasting away and wonder if this is really justice. But then they remember Lucas. They remember the gap-toothed smile, the dinosaur hoodie, the notes left on the kitchen counter every morning. They remember an 11-year-old boy who just wanted a friend. And they remember who took that away. This is the story of Ethan Whitmore, the boy genius who thought murder was a game. The teenager who laughed at a judge. The young man who collapsed when he realized he wasn't special after all. And this is the story of Lucas Dellinger, the boy who deserved so much more. The boy who will never be forgotten. If this story moved you, if it made you think, made you feel, made you want to hold your loved ones a little closer, I want to ask you to do a few things. First, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Stories like this one take weeks to research and write. Your subscription helps us keep doing this work. Second, leave a comment below. Tell me what you thought. Tell me what part of this story hit you the hardest. Tell me where you're watching from. And third, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. A parent. A teacher. Anyone who works with kids. Because the warning signs were there for Ethan Whitmore. They were there for years. And nobody acted. Maybe, just maybe, the next time someone sees those signs, they'll remember this story. And they'll do something about it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying until the end. And thank you for honoring Lucas's memory by listening to his story. Until next time. Stay safe out there.